Sometimes the hardest part about being forgotten is not the silence. It is the moment you realize you stopped listening for footsteps. Out on the Wyoming prairie, a woman could work from sunrise to dark, and the world would never notice. The fence would stay mended. The cattle would stay fed. Smoke would rise steady from the chimney. And as long as everything looked the same from a distance, nobody would ride up to ask if she was still breathing. Emily Carter had learned that, slow and painful. The rain came hard that autumn afternoon. Not gentle rain, not the kind that taps soft against a window. It came heavy and angry, flattening the tall grass and turning the dry creek bed behind her barn into a brown river in less than an hour. She was already in the water when the first fence post snapped. The rope tore through her palms as the young steer lunged forward. Mud sucked at her boots, pulling her down with every step. The hemp burned deeper into skin, already split open from the morning's work. Her breath came fast and sharp. Cold water wrapped around her thighs and kept climbing. 30 head of cattle milled in the lower pasture. 30 head was everything she had left. Thunder cracked overhead. The sky turned dark as evening, though it was barely past noon. The creek swallowed the fence line, swallowed the haystacks, swallowed the path that led toward the road. She could run. The house stood on higher ground, dry, safe, empty. But the cattle were below, and if she lost them, she lost the farm. If she lost the farm, she lost the last piece of her husband that still felt alive. Emily waded deeper. Water hit her waist. Her dress dragged heavy. Her hands were numb now, but she kept pulling rope, looping it around a panicked steer's neck. The animal's eyes rolled white. Its hooves churned mud and water together into thick brown chaos. "Easy," she whispered, though her teeth chattered so hard the word barely formed. Rain stung her face. She tasted iron when she opened her mouth to breathe. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Through the curtain of rain, she lifted her head. Up on the ridge, where the grass was still dry and green, a rider sat on a sorrel horse, hat pulled low, oilskin coat dark with water, saddlebags heavy on both sides. He did not wave, did not shout, did not move. He just watched. Emily looked away first. They always rode on. She turned back to the steer and pulled again. Her palms screamed. Blood mixed with mud and disappeared in the brown water. The steer fought, then stumbled forward. When she looked again, the horse was tied to a scrub oak. The man was walking toward her. He moved steady down the slope, boots sinking into soaked ground. No hurry, no panic, just steady steps. He stepped into the water like he belonged there, stopped a few feet from her. She could smell horse sweat and leather and long days on the trail. He looked at her hands first, then at the rising water, then at the cattle. His eyes met hers. "Where's your place?" he asked. Not, "Can I help?" Not you, all right. Where's your place? The question caught her off guard. Emily lifted her chin toward the house on the hill, log walls barely visible through the sheets of rain. He nodded once. "Best save what's yours then." He moved past her before she could answer. Grabbed the rope trailing in the current. His hands worked quick and sure, the kind of hands that had done this 1,000 times. He started up the slope. The steer followed. Emily stood there shaking in the cold water. Then she grabbed another rope. Together they worked without speaking, driving cattle up through mud and rising current, crossing back and forth between pasture and hill. The rain did not stop, but there were 2 of them now. When the last of the herd reached high ground, Emily turned toward the barn. Water wrapped around its walls. No, she breathed. She splashed back down the slope. The barn doors were half underwater. She forced one open. Brown water rushed inside. Hay floated in broken clumps. Tools scattered across the floor. Her milk cow stood in the far corner, pulling against her tether, eyes wild. Emily pushed through waist-deep water. "Easy now," she said, voice low and steady like her husband had taught her. The stranger came in behind her without asking what to do. He grabbed what tools he could reach: hammer, coil of wire, harness straps. Emily untied the cow. The animal balked. The current shoved against them both. She leaned into the water and kept talking. One step, another. The cow followed. They crossed what used to be a creek and felt more like a river. Water pressed hard against her ribs. Her legs trembled from cold and exhaustion. The stranger moved ahead, angling across the current instead of fighting it. By the time they reached the porch, the valley floor had disappeared under brown water. Everything below the house was gone. Emily tied the cow to the rail with shaking fingers. Lightning flickered across the flooded land. The stranger stood beside her, dripping, breathing hard, hat streaming water. He should have left before the storm trapped him. He did not. Emily opened the door. Warm lamplight spilled onto the porch. "There's coffee," she said. And for the first time in 3 years, she stepped inside knowing she was not the only one crossing the threshold. Morning came gray and quiet, like the storm had used up all its anger in the night. Emily woke on her pallet near the stove. Her dress was stiff with dried mud. Her hands throbbed where the rope had torn them open. For a moment, she forgot he was there. Then she heard the steady sound of boots outside. Measured steps. The creak of fence wire being tested. She pushed herself up and went to the window. He was already walking the upper pasture, checking posts, pressing each one with his shoulder to see if it would hold. The cattle were spread across the hill, grazing like nothing had happened. The valley below was still a wide sheet of brown water. Emily lit the stove. The kindling caught quick. She filled the blue enamel pot with the last of her coffee grounds. Real coffee. She had been saving it for winter. This counted. When he came in, he scraped his boots at the door without being told. Mud fell in dry clumps to the floor. He stood near the stove, letting the heat reach him. "Fences are down along the lower pasture," he said. "Posts are gone. Wires tangled." Emily poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed one to him. He wrapped both hands around it before drinking. They stood there, with steam rising between them. "What needs doing first?" he asked. She blinked. It had been a long time since anyone had asked her that, like they meant to help. "The fence," she said. "Cattle wander without it." He nodded, took a stub of pencil from his pocket, and turned over an old envelope he found on the shelf. "Fence," he wrote. "Barn's gone," she added quietly. "Hay with it." He wrote barn assess damage. They went through the rest slow. Cow shelter. Salvage tools. Check well. Move chickens higher. He wrote careful, neat letters, like someone once taught him patience. When the list was done, he slid the envelope across the table. "We can start now," he said. "We." The word felt strange in her chest. He went outside. Soon the sound of hammer on post carried across the yard. Steady. Sure. Not rushed. Emily walked the pasture, counting cattle. 28. She had started with 30. 2 gone. She swallowed hard, but kept moving. One young steer limped. She cleaned the cut above its hoof and wrapped it tight. Her hands burned, but she did not stop. The bandages were already dirty again. By noon, the sun burned through the clouds. The floodwater had stopped rising. It held steady, maybe even dropped a little. She carried him cornbread and cold beans. He ate standing, eyes scanning the land like he was memorizing it. He worked like a man who did not know how to sit still. That evening, as the light turned gold across the prairie, she tried to pump water for washing. Pain shot through her palm so sharp it made her gasp. He was beside her before she realized he had crossed the room. "Let me see." She almost pulled away. Nobody had held her hands in 3 years. He turned her palm up, gentle but firm. The rope burns were red and angry. Dirt ground deep into torn skin. "These need tending," he said. He warmed water on the stove, mixed it with carbolic, cleaned each cut, slow and careful. The sting made her breath hitch, but she did not complain. His hands were scarred too, white lines across knuckles, thick calluses from rope and reins. But his touch was steady. When he wrapped her palms in clean linen torn from an old sheet, something in her chest tightened. "Should have done this yesterday," he muttered. "Ain't nobody here to see them?" she answered. He met her eyes. "I see them." The words landed heavy. They ate in silence after that. Later, when the fire burned low and darkness pressed against the windows, she spoke without planning to. "After my husband died," she said, staring at the stove. "Neighbors came. Said if I needed anything, just ask." She swallowed. I waited. The cabin creaked in the wind. I stood on that porch every evening, thinking someone might ride up. Help with fence, with hay, with anything. She laughed once, short and bitter. Nobody came. He did not interrupt. "After a while," she said softer, "I stopped expecting them to." Silence stretched between them. He leaned back in his chair. "Been moving 5 years," he said at last. "Left my place after the war. Figured if I didn't stay nowhere long enough, I couldn't be forgot." She looked up. "That work?" He shook his head once. "No." They sat with that. Outside, the wind died down. Inside, the stove ticked soft as it cooled. She realized something then. He had not asked her for food, had not asked for pay, had not spoken about leaving once the road cleared. He had only asked one thing. "Where's your place?" And he had stayed. The next morning came cold and clear. The floodwater had begun to drain back into the creek bed. Mud cracked where the sun touched it. The road might be passable in a day or two. He stood on the porch beside her, looking down at the wreckage of the barn. "Road'll clear soon," he said. She nodded. He did not say he would go. She did not ask him to stay. They worked all day without speaking about it. By evening, the lean-to for the cow stood solid against the house wall. The upper fence line was mended strong. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and red, she stood beside him on the porch. The land looked wounded, but alive. She felt the old fear creeping back in. Once the road clears, she thought, he'll ride off like the rest. Her throat tightened. Before she could stop herself, she turned to him. "How long you planning to stay?" The question hung there in the fading light. He did not answer right away. The wind shifted across the prairie. Finally, he looked at her, steady and quiet. "Road might clear in a day," he said, "but that ain't what you're asking." She held his gaze. "No," she said. He looked out over the pasture again, then back at her. "If you'll have the help," he said slowly, "I can stay a while." The air felt different after that, not lighter, but steadier, like something had shifted that could not be undone. And for the first time since the day her husband was lowered into the ground, Emily Carter did not feel like she was standing alone against the wide Wyoming sky. The road cleared 2 days later. By then, the mud had hardened into cracked earth. The creek had shrunk back into its narrow bed, running high, but obedient. The sky stretched wide and blue, like the storm had never happened. He saddled his horse at first light. Emily stood in the doorway, hands wrapped in fresh linen, watching him tighten the cinch. The sorrel stamped once, then stood still. Neither of them spoke. The sacks he brought from town were stacked by the wall inside. Flour, beans, coffee, salt, enough to last a while. He had ridden hard for it. Came back the same day. Came back. That mattered more than she wanted to admit. He finished saddling, then rested one hand on the horn of the saddle and looked toward the road. It was open now. Clear. He could ride out before noon and be gone by supper. She felt that old feeling rise up in her chest, the one she knew too well, the waiting, the bracing for someone to leave. She stepped off the porch. "You heading out?" she asked, keeping her voice even. He looked at her, really looked. "I told you I'd stay a while," he said. She nodded once. "A while ain't forever." He didn't smile. "No," he agreed. Silence stretched between them. The cattle moved slow across the upper pasture. The lean-to roof caught the morning sun. Smoke curled from the chimney behind her. He untied the reins from the post. For one sharp second, her heart dropped. Then he looped them back again. "I ain't good at staying," he said plain. "But I'm worse at leaving when there's work to be done." She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "There's work," she said. He nodded. They moved through the days that followed like two people learning the shape of something fragile. They rebuilt what they could. The lower pasture dried enough for them to cut grass before frost. He showed her how to angle the scythe so it bit clean and even. She showed him where the soil stayed soft after rain and where it turned stubborn as stone. They stacked new hay against the side of the house, not as much as they lost, but enough. At night, they sat at the table and made lists. Fence repair, firewood, salted beef for winter. "We'll manage," he would say. "We." The word settled deeper each time. One evening, as the first frost touched the grass silver, she found him standing at the edge of the lower pasture. He was staring at the place where the barn had stood. "I keep seeing it upright," she said, coming to stand beside him. "The way it was." He nodded. "Hard to let go of what you built." "It wasn't just the wood," she said softly. "It was the years." He looked at her then. "You still got the years," he said. "They didn't wash away." She swallowed. It wasn't the barn she had been grieving all along. It was the waiting, the standing on the porch for someone who never came. They built a smaller shed before the first real snow. It wasn't grand, just straight posts, strong roof, walls tight against the wind. When they set the last board in place, he stepped back and looked at it. "Reckon it'll hold," he said. "It will," she answered. Winter came slow that year. Cold settled over the land like a blanket. The prairie turned pale and still. Smoke rose steady from the chimney most days. They worked side by side, fed the cattle, broke ice at the trough, split wood until their shoulders ached. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. The quiet between them was no longer heavy. One night, wind howling against the cabin walls, she woke to the sound of something creaking outside. She sat up fast. He was already moving toward the door. "I'll check it," he said. She grabbed her coat anyway and followed. It was only a loose board on the lean-to roof, the wind tugging at it hard. They fixed it together under starlight, hands stiff with cold. When they stepped back inside, cheeks red from the wind, she felt something she had not felt in years. Not fear, not waiting. Belonging. Late winter brought a letter. He had not told her he had written to anyone. She had not asked. The envelope bore a return address from Missouri. He read it once, twice, then folded it careful. "Brother found me," he said. Her chest tightened. "Good news?" she asked. "He's alive," he said. "Got land out west now. Says I can come. Start fresh." The words hung between them. She nodded slow. "That's good." He studied her face. "You want me to go?" The question was honest. She could have lied, could have told him he owed her nothing. But she had learned something since the flood. Waiting in silence did not save anything. "I want you to stay," she said. The wind moved across the prairie outside. Gentle now. He stepped closer. "I ain't promising forever," he said again. "I don't know how." "I ain't asking for forever," she answered. "Just don't leave because you're afraid to be wanted." He held her gaze. Then he nodded once. "I'll write him back," he said. "Tell him I found my place." Spring came with green, pushing up through the thawing earth. They planted oats in the lower field, repaired the last stretch of fence, moved the cattle down to fresh grass. One morning, as sunlight spilled gold across the prairie, she stood on the porch and watched him walk the pasture. He was not watching the road anymore. Neither was she. The land looked different now, not because the scars were gone, but because they had built over them. The barn was smaller. The herd was smaller. The future was uncertain. But when she stepped inside the cabin and set 2 plates on the table without thinking, she realized something simple and steady. She was no longer waiting for someone to come. Someone already had. And he had asked one question that changed everything. "Where's your place?" Now she knew. It was here. And she was not forgotten anymore.